All right, I am by myself this afternoon. I am AJ. Social media stuff is going to be in the description underneath this video if you are watching on YouTube. Otherwise, if you are listening on any of the podcast mediums, then that is also going to be in the bio or in the intro to this episode. So, Game 4, Bolts drop one finally. We kind of expected them to lose one or two games in this series. We didn't think that they were going to go 3-0 immediately. So nothing to panic about. I had to cool off last night before doing this episode because of how frustrating it was to watch this game from a play side, from an officiating side, and from a dangerous play side. I mean, the only way that Montreal has been able to stay competitive with the Lightning so far is to take some questionable runs. So we'll get into all of that in this episode. Do a quick period by period recap before we start discussing some of the nitty gritty stuff. So period one, immediately within the first 5 minutes, the Bolts already have 11 shot attempts and 6 shots on goal to Montreal's 0-0. So the Bolts came out to try and seal this victory to complete the sweep. And from early on, it looked like it was going to happen. Kucherov played a puck behind the net off the boards. It pops up, just lands on top of the net, almost falls in the goal behind Price. And you'll see a lot more of this iffy luck throughout the game. Hedman was causing turnovers immediately. For the Bolts, kind of what they've been able to capitalize throughout the entire series. The Bolts have now scored 11 goals within 10 seconds of a turnover in this series alone. So they are going to have to continue to capitalize on those chances when they can steal the puck away from the Canadiens. Ross Colton was looking really good in the first period on the fourth line. And he was also taking some shifts on the second with Cirelli and Stamkos. Noticed that as well, with Killorn still being out. I think he plays game 5. I don't think you can keep him out. But Joseph has done an amazing job stepping up into his role with Killorn being out, even though he is playing on the fourth line. He has 2 assists in 3 games. He's done a hell of a job. So continuing to look to him to, piece together some plays while Killorn is still out. Canadiens take the first blood. Suzuki walks the puck in deep behind the net. Anderson parks out up front. It was a great pass just to put the puck past Vazzy. So Montreal starts it 1-0, and that is their first lead of the entire series over the Lightning, that 1-0 lead. So things start to get a little scrappy. Perry comes charging in after a shot. He falls into Vazzy's crease. Vazzy gives him a nice little bump with his glove on his nose, which has already been stitched up from a high stick from last series. I don't think Perry was selling the head snap. I think that actually genuinely hurt to get punched in the nose by a glove while you've already been stitched up. So I like the kickback from Vazzy. I don't know if we should be doing that down 1-0 already, but I mean, you have to protect your crease, so I like it. Montreal looks so much faster in game 4 than they have the entire series. They came out absolutely flying. And we talked on the last episode about how they did not want to play the speed game against the Bolts. So it was intriguing to see them come out and actually compete board to board and line to line with the Bolts. They eventually have a offsetting minor penalty, a 4-on-4, that almost acts like a timeout for the Lightning. They really needed to regroup after coming out really strong and then just getting blown back by the Canadiens for the remaining half of the first period. The Bolts go on the power play on a 4-on-3 shortly after the offsetting minors. They have a ton of chances. They bury one off the post and a couple by the net. So the chances are there. They just cannot sink them, and that ends the period. Right after the whistle and the buzzer for the end of period one, there was a scrum in the middle of the ice involving players on both sides that does result in offsetting penalties again. So they do start period two 4-on-4. The Canadians primarily have started setting up behind the net in the offensive zone behind Vazzy to look to set up passes right in front of the net. Other than streaking, 2-on-1 odd man rushes that the Canadians have been able to produce off of turnovers and off of Lightning D-men that are pressing too far, the only way that they've been able to capitalize on chances is when they are in deep, they need to play from behind the net. And that is the biggest change that I saw coming out of games 1, 2, and 3, is that they're really, really setting up shop behind the net and looking for passes right in front of Vazzy just to bury them from there. They don't have a chance that often just to go speed to speed, even though they came out fast in this game. I look for them to do that more in game 5, getting in deep against the boards and trying to pass into the slot area from behind the net. The Bolts at this point are looking very uncomfortable on the rush. Point ends up taking a high sticking penalty at 6:50 to put the Canadians on the power play. Penalty kill looked good. Canadians didn't have a whole lot of chances in the offensive zone, but the second the point comes out of the box, he retrieves a puck, and Weber, who I really like Shea Weber up until this game, his career has been phenomenal. I think he is a world-class defenseman, but he turned on the hunter mode a little bit in this game. He was the only defenseman back when point came out of the box, and the hit initially looks very clean on the boards. Point gets folded on the boards. He hops right back up. He's not hurt, but when you watch the replay in slow motion, you can really see Weber's elbow come up. And they showed it a couple minutes after the play happened, and I was like, oh shit, this might set a standard for the rest of the game, if not the remaining games in the series. I thought it was really interesting to see that early on, into the second period. They're already starting to take some runs at Bolt Stars. And they're up 1-0 at this point. So something to look at for the remainder of the game, which I will get into another couple interesting hits here and there. The refs very much swallowed their whistles in this game. The Bolts go on the power play shortly after this. They were able to keep the puck out of the net right before that, and they really needed to capitalize on this power play. It doesn't happen, and during this power play, I have a very, very poorly drawn example here. If you are listening on any of the podcast mediums, I will do my best to create a visual for you of a voice. But if you are watching on YouTube, so this will also help you. This is during the power play. This is going to be Shea Weber here. This is Braden Point, and then this is Jake Evans. So Point is entering the zone with Jake Evans wrapped all over him. He's entering the zone up high. Evans is pressing Point against the board while also hooking his own arm underneath Point's arm. This is just a classic scenario of interference or holding or something of the sort. Obstruction, I guess, is the general penalty for it. It does not get called. So that's sign one that the refs swallowed their whistles. During this play, though, as Point is making his way up the boards with Evans draped all over him, Point is being held right here, about halfway through the zone. Shea Weber comes from in between the dots and absolutely just speeds his way, which if he made contact here, where Point was falling down because of Evans. And mind you, Point has the puck this entire time. So Evans is not playing the puck, he's playing the body, and he's holding. That should have been called a penalty to begin with. Point falls down. Thank God he falls down, because the way that Weber speeds from in between the dots, he absolutely could have sent Point to the hospital here. And I know as a Bolts fan, this is probably coming across as biased, but if you look it up, just look up Shea Weber hits from game 4. He barely misses Point's head here on this play. And if Weber were to make contact here, I know that the Department of Player Safety is a little iffy on handing out suspensions. And I know Weber doesn't necessarily have a history of making plays like this, like violent intentional injury plays, but he would have gotten a 5-minute misconduct and a suspension that would have rolled over into next season if he had made contact on this play. Charging, boarding, hitting a defensive player, or whatever you want to call it, Evans really sets him up. It was like a WWE play where Evans is holding him against the boards and lets go as soon as he's seen Weber coming charging towards the boards. So Point really, really just barely escapes having to go to the hospital with Weber just glancing off this hit. If you can see the boards rock after Weber hits it, you'll really get an idea of how concussive this hit could have been. And this is throughout the game. And I think the most disgusting part of it for me was I was watching the Canadian broadcast, not the Montreal Canadiens broadcast, but the Sportsnet broadcast. And they actually said, like, oh, you have to, let me see if I can find it. They were praising Weber during this. They said, clearly that was the message, going after the star players for the Tampa Bay Lightning. It's a long list of star players, so you have to continue to be aggressive. Point clearly being targeted in reference to this play with Weber. It's been working so far, going after Point and Kucherov, who have taken cross checks and a few hits to begin the game. And the next quote is, I like the approach. Now, again, if Weber made contact on this hit, he would have been suspended for the remainder of the series and probably would have carried over into the regular season next year, even without a history of plays like this. So I don't like the praise from the media. I understand that if you're down in a series like this and you rely on physicality to do your talking, I get it. I watch hockey. I understand it's a physical sport. That's a reason why I watch it. I know that hitting and taking the body is a huge part of this game in order to wear your opponent down if you need to gain ground. But there's a difference between taking the body and looking to injure players. And being down 3-0 in a series to a juggernaut offense, if your game plan is to look to put star players out of the game for you to have a hope to win this series, it makes you question if they should even be in this series at all based on their level of skill. And we kind of talked about that in the first couple of episodes, is do the Canadiens deserve to be here? I'm not going to be the judge of that. They had to go through a ton of huge teams to get to the Stanley Cup Finals. So I think their skill level is there. But that is no longer what they're relying on. They're relying on headhunting to this degree. And I think the officials need to watch out for this on both sides now. Because I don't think it's just going to be the Canadiens. I think the Bolts come out swinging. I think John Cooper may put in Schenn for game 5 in place of Savard, just to have that physical presence again out on the ice. But the refs swallowed their whistles for this entire game. And I think this hit, or this almost hit, is going to be shown again and again and again if this series, ends up being a bloodbath between the two. This is the sparking point for this. This will be the main catalyst. So, look it up. Just look up the hit. it's all over Twitter, it's all over YouTube, it's all over any of the highlights from the broadcasting mediums and stuff like that. So it's not hard to find, but I really don't like the reaction and the reception from a lot of the media figureheads of this hit. I don't think that it's an acceptable play, and I don't think it should be praised the way that it's being praised right now. So final point is, if you have to take star players out of the game physically for you to have a chance in this series, I don't think you deserve to be here. Point blank, period. The Bolts don't go on to capitalize on this power play. But they just keep getting chances and keep getting chances and keep getting chances. They keep firing the puck off the post. And John Cooper talked about it after the game. I think they basically asked, hey, what did you guys do wrong? It's like, well, we hit the post too many times. And I don't think that's an excuse. I think it's just an observation. This game could have been 6-3, but it's not. And that's how hockey goes. Sometimes you hit the post. Sometimes it goes in after the post. Sometimes it doesn't. And it just didn't for the Bolts in game 4. So you then see on the power play after these post hits, Hedman gets the puck back and fires a 95.2 mile-an-hour slap shot off the top of Braden Point's knee. And my stomach dropped when I saw it, because I thought it was another Killorn situation. We can't afford to have Braden Point taken out of this game, whether it's by the Canadians or if it's by friendly fire. We need him in this series. Even if he's been quiet the last couple games coming off of that goal streak, it doesn't matter. His presence on the ice draws attention, and that's what we need from him, especially on the power play. So on this power play, they hit 2 posts and it doesn't go in. Just towards the end of the period, McDonough picks off a pass, and they're able to score within 10 seconds of the turnover. He passes the puck, no look behind him, to Barclay Goodrow, who's in front of the net, who buries it to make it, 1-1. And the period ends. Period 3, the Bolts come out really, really hard. You can feel the sense of urgency that they have. They know that they're 20 minutes away and 1 goal away from taking home the Stanley Cup 2 years in a row and sweeping the Canadians. You can really feel this. And I'm sorry, the shot that Point took off the knee was actually the beginning of the third here. Again, the ref's slowing the whistle. Johnson and Weber are going at it through the center of the Canadians' defensive zone while Johnson has the puck. Weber, wraps his arm around Johnson and just throws him down to the ice, and there's no call again. And it's, I don't understand it. A scrum comes together after this play, most of it being started by the Canadians, and Kelly Sunderland decides to put 3 and 3 from each team into the box. So the Bolts' entire third line is in the box, and the Canadians' top 2 defensemen and another player are in the box. And it's supposed to be, offsetting 2-minute penalty. All 6 of these players are in the penalty box for over 6 minutes because there's no stoppage of play. So fortunately, the Bolts were able to capitalize on this to make it 2-1. Joseph comes screaming down the right side with Maroon on the left. Joseph places a perfect pass over the defender's stick, who's placed on the ice. He gets the puck about 5 or 6 inches up and just falls onto the ice right on Maroon's stick to tie the game. Oh, I'm sorry, right before this, Romanov, it's the youngest defenseman in Canadians playoff history to score a goal. His shift lasts about 7-8 seconds. He comes off the bench, receives a pass to the blue line, and rips one past Vazzy to make it 2-1, and then the Maroon goal followed that. With 5 minutes left in the third period and a tie game, the shot attempts are 58-32 Lightning, and shots on net are 27-19. So it's not for a lack of opportunity on the Bolts' being the reason for this game being tied. It's just the puck not finding the back of the net. This game could have been a blowout, but this is just how it goes. And you can't win every single game. Even though as much as we wanted to get this sweep, it wasn't in the cards. It just wasn't. And they, banged 3 pucks off the post by the end of the third. Hedman gets a very clean shot on Price. Price nabs it. 1 minute left. Bolts go on the power play. And I think that this is the deciding factor in this game, is that the Lightning had plenty of chances to bury this game, and they couldn't. Whether it was, pucks off the post, clearly missing shots. Cirelli on the power play in place of Killorn takes a few passes in front of the net, and instead of just getting the puck on the net, he passes the puck out wide looking for another shot. And at some point, you're just going to have to take the shot, get the puck on the net itself. And, going into overtime with this was a double minor penalty. So they have 2 2-minute power plays, and they don't get it done in the remaining minute of the third period. They have 3-minute man advantage going into overtime. And a stat line came across, and I don't remember the specific percentages, but the Montreal Canadiens penalty kill in the playoffs is the best penalty kill percentage in the last 100 years. And the Bolts power play in this playoffs is the best power play percentage-wise in the last 100 years. Going up against each other, it's a fairy tale ending. The Bolts can put this away with their dominant power play. That did not show up for this game. And I think part of it is Killorn being out. They don't have that unit that they're used to. But going into overtime, Cooper starts out overtime, the 5-on-4 advantage, with our second power play line. I get that you still have 3 minutes on a man advantage, but your sense of urgency needs to be now. We were 0-3 in overtime up until this game. We had lost 1 overtime game to each of our opponents going into the Stanley Cup Finals. 0-3 in overtime. Don't you think that the sense of urgency was get our best players out there to end this now, to take home the cup, not to, yes, I understand the first power play line hadn't gotten it done all night, but they had chances. They just didn't finish them out. So I didn't necessarily like the move. They weren't out there for very long, don't get me wrong, the second power play line, but you need to have your best players on the ice in overtime with a man advantage. There's no question about that. I'm obviously not an NHL head coach, but I think that's a pretty simple logic to follow, is put your best players out with your chance to win the game with a man advantage. Like, you don't ever get the chance to have a power play in overtime in a Stanley Cup clinching game for 3 minutes. I don't know if that's ever happened before, but I would think that you put out your best players to make sure that you take that cup home right then and there. And I even said it to who I was watching the game with. I said, if the Canadiens kill the penalty, this game's over. They're going to score and they're going to win. The Bolts not scoring a goal on this power play is basically writing the death certificate for Game 4. And that's exactly what happened. They got good chances. Palat almost got one. Hedman almost got one. Point almost got one in the middle. And then during this power play, Vasilevsky had to make an insane save on the breakaway chance for almost shorthanded goal to win the game. Price was standing on his head, playing phenomenally in overtime. And Cooper takes the last timeout, or the only timeout that they have, with 33 seconds left on the power play. And even after that, they couldn't get it done. Very shortly after the penalty kill was over, Anderson scores the game-winning goal, and it's over. 3-2 final score. The Bolts are now 0-4 in overtime games with a loss to each of their opponents that they've had to go through in this series. Questionable hits Um, questionable plays on both sides of the puck, not just the Canadians. The Lightning got away with a ton of calls in this game too. The officiating needs to be consistent, and it was hysterical on the Sportsnet broadcast. They had Bettman come on for an interview, and he did nothing but praise the officials and the player safety, George Peros, player safety head, saying that they do the best that they can. They're not perfect, but they strive for perfection, and that they do an amazing job. And then for the remaining 2 regulation periods and the overtime period, for the refs to completely swallow their whistle, it's exactly what we've been talking about the entire Stanley Cup playoffs, not just for these 2 teams. It's been throughout the entire playoffs. The officiating has been questionable at best. What's going to get called? Cross-checking is going to get called? Maybe, maybe not. Holding, definitely not going to get called. Weird hooking calls, just there's no consistency whatsoever in the officiating throughout this entire playoff run for every single team. So I think it's something that gets revisited in the offseason. Call the penalties or don't, like these makeup calls and stuff, like with the Tim Peel hot mic situation where he was like, yeah, I wanted to call one there, and it's not a want, it's a was there an infraction or was there not an infraction? I understand you want to let them play in the playoffs and you don't want games decided on power plays, but it's the rules. So make the call or don't make the call, because both teams, at least the common ground that Bolts and Canadians fans can have now is that we both despise the officiating throughout this entire series. And I don't think that's going to change. And I think that's something that both teams are going to have to be aware of, is that you're just going to have to play what you need to play in order to win these games. It's despicable, the amount of missed calls and potentially dangerous plays that are allowed to happen because they're not playing these calls, or they're not making these calls, and players are taking mental notes like, oh, that's not going to get called, I'm going to, take advantage of that. And then after they see it a few times, one person gets called and it's like, well, what the hell happened in the last 4 times that this got let go? So the Bolts now have 11 goals in 10 seconds, within 10 seconds of the turnover this series. That is going to be the deciding factor for Game 5, as well as the Bolts power play stepping up. They're the #1 power play in the playoffs in the last 100 years for a reason, but they didn't show that in Game 4. They're going to have to capitalize on these chances. And I don't think anyone believes realistically that the Canadians are going to come back to win 4 games straight to steal this cup away from the Bolts. But I do believe that if the Bolts don't step up and do what they've done in the last 3 games before this, that this series is going to be a lot more interesting than it really needs to be. Game 5 is in Tampa. And with the hurricane coming in, we still are unsure of the schedule. But, hopefully Killorn will be back in the lineup as well as Joseph has done for us. I think there's a decision to be made with Cooper now. Do you keep Ross Colton in, or do you play the hot hand with Joseph on that 4th line? Do you play Joseph, Maroon, and Johnson on that 4th line instead of Colton? I don't know. I think that you have to play the hot hand. I think that Colton may be a healthy scratch for Game 5, especially if Killorn is back. Joseph has two points in 3 games, and Colton doesn't. He's been very good throughout the entire playoffs with very limited ice time, but Joseph showed up when it really, really mattered in Game 4. So I still think the Bolts take it in Game 5 now. I don't think that they have the inexperience to allow them to not come out and play like they need to in Game 5. I think they revisit what they need to in Game 4 and they completely turn it around. I think the Canadians do come into this game with a head of steam. But I also think that Luke Shen should be on the ice for game 5. Savard has played well, but one of his mistakes led to a Canadiens goal. So Luke Shen is not a liability by any means on defense, but he's not David Savard. So there are going to be decisions that have to be made going into game 5 in order to seal the cup victory for the Bolts. And I think physicality on the ice is going to be one of those factors. That's pretty much it. Bolts take game 5. I say 4-2, with 2 goals from the power play unit. They're way too experienced and have way too much playoff run experience to allow themselves to come back out and play in a unfocused fashion. I think that all of these players are strong enough to come off of a loss like this and recognize what they have to do to turn this around, because the chances are there, the opportunities are there, but the goals weren't. So this game could have been a blowout, and it wasn't. And I don't think the Bolts change a lot of their game plan, but I think they look to refining what they have to do in order to go back to back. So thank you for listening. Everyone in Tampa, please be safe during the hurricane. And, you know, Cubs coming home in 5. Mayor Castor gets her wish. And I am very superstitious. I don't think she jinxed it, but I think it was very stupid to say what she said. Expecting, even if it was a joke or not, don't say it, you know. Don't hope that professional players are going to throw a game in order to win at home instead of on the road. So I don't think this was her fault at all, but I still think it was something that was very stupid to say. Bolts in 5, 4-2. We will have the game recap up shortly after the game tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Hopefully Zach will be back to join me so he can help me retain my rants a little bit, and look for the Bolts to come out and play an extremely physical game for game 5. Thank you for listening, and you will see us soon.